Morning, everyone. Welcome. So I'm very excited to at least provide some context today about our experiences in BI, basically, and how BI evolved in my organization. So you probably recognize this brand symbol here, and I think the keynote speaker mentioned something beforehand as well around Domino's and our experience into the market with leveraging some of our initiatives. But just to give you some insights, first, a slide, 3 minutes, 5 seconds. I assume everyone has read this slide. I have to do this in every presentation. It's some legal stuff. But my name is Fred Deletter. I'm the director for BI and Enterprise Information Management within Domino's. I joined the company 3 years ago at this point. And as you all know, BI has changed a lot in the last couple of years. And BI is very different within organizations as well, based upon my experience. So I'm keen to share a bit in terms of how BI evolved in our organization and what are the kind of maturity levels that we went through the last couple of years in order to be in the space where we are right now. And talk a bit about our data strategy and our wider strategy in general in terms of the journey that I'll probably talk around in terms of data readiness, data strategy, but then also how do we put our analytical layers on top of that, insight layers, but then more importantly, where we're very focused on is activation of data. So I think a couple of the talking points of the keynote speaker resonated pretty well in terms of what I'm going to present today as well. But it's very different than when I came into the organization. But we also took a specific strategy to enable some of the things that we wanted to deploy at an enterprise scale and make sure that we were not kind of running before we were kind of able to walk. So I'll talk a bit about that. And please feel free, I'll try to get a couple of breaks in the presentation to at least ask questions. But I'll make sure we have at least 15 minutes at the end just for you guys to ask me anything that you've seen or want to kind of compare between organizations. So first, some context. I think it's probably important to at least give at least a high-level snapshot what Domino's as a brand and organization is at this point in time, because the organization, as you probably are aware through kind of the media exposure, has had exponential growth over the last couple of years. We're not just a Midwest company anymore, but also in terms of kind of the maturity in terms of data and what we're doing across our kind of different business units in terms of creating competitive advantage around that. So first of all, our mission. Our mission is very focused on we want to be number one globally and then be in a dominant position. But also more importantly, in the last kind of element, in every neighborhood. We want to be a global brand, a global dominant brand, basically in our pizza category, but also kind of consistently in every neighborhood globally. So that's a very interesting kind of vision that we are rallying around. In 2018, we'd actually surpassed and be the number one globally in terms of global retail sales, not just US, but globally across every kind of channel and category. But clearly, we still have a lot of white space and opportunity kind of globally to improve our brands and exposure in the different markets. And we're a global brand, so we're not just kind of Midwest anymore. We're very kind of clearly a very large infrastructure footprint in terms of brand exposure in the US and the Americas, but we clearly have a lot of markets where we probably 100 plus, I think, at this point, where we also kind of sell our pizzas. The interesting construct is that for the US, DPZ, which is our ticker symbol for Domino's, is the master franchisee. But we also have a number of other entities outside of the US, basically, which are basically the master franchisee, and we kind of like, we get a royalty stream back from them, but they own one or more countries, basically. And they sub-franchise, basically, at the store level in order to kind of get the footprint and manage their kind of operations. So that's a very unique proposition because it's not just one entity, it's multiple entities, but we're working as a global brand, which is very unique. Some key global stats from 2018 and some fun facts as well. Let me go back. So global retail sales, at this point, $13.5 billion US dollars, which is quite sizable. I think the growth that we've seen over the last couple of years has been pretty explosive, like I said. Store count is for us very important. So right now, I think we just surpassed 16,000 stores, rooftops globally, basically. We have around 6,000 in the US. Most of them are franchised. We have around 500 kind of domestic stores, which really allows us to experiment as well in terms of innovation and operations before we actually expose it out to the franchisee network. And internationally, we probably have around 10,000 stores right now. And I would say every year we're probably growing with an additional 1,000 rooftops. So that's pretty aggressive. I think around 250 domestically to 300, and then kind of like 700 in the balance. So you can see the explosive growth in terms of stores and driving volume. And as you probably have heard through kind of maybe some of the media outlets, for us, we're very focused on a fortressing strategy, basically, in making sure that we own kind of the neighborhood as well, but making sure that we can deliver within a very kind of aggressive time window our product to the consumers. And we are sure that the quality is assured basically in terms of that perspective. So we're very focused on that. In terms of market share across kind of the pizza category, I think US market share around 19%, international around 13-14%. Clearly, we're very delivery-centric and dominant. I think 1 out of 3 pizzas in the US is being delivered through Domino's, basically, so that's pretty dominant. Where we focus on every channel as well, carry out as well, and very focused between kind of digital, non-digital, so all the kind of channels and touch points that we want to optimize with our consumers. So a couple of fun initiatives. So we also try to, a lot of the innovation that we do and smart deployment of technology is also to fuel kind of marketing initiatives. So I assume, how many of you have heard the launch of hotspots in 2018? Anyone knows what the concept is? So basically, because we're very delivery-centric, basically, we define kind of an ability to deliver in custom-defined kind of locations. Could be beach, whatever, a park. And we provide kind of hotspots there for customers to basically deliver their product there at their convenience. But also, very interestingly, we also allow kind of people to submit proposed hotspots, basically, where they would like to have kind of pizza delivered, and we go through kind of process of onboarding. So that has been proven pretty, it's not just gimmicky, but very impactful, basically, in terms of kind of exposure and kind of an additional touch point with our, and convenience factor with our consumers. So it's not just kind of innovation and a marketing gimmick, and I understand kind of through the keynote speaker, not everything has to be a return on investment, but clearly it can drive return on investment as well, some of the initiatives that we kind of push into the market space. Another one is, who has heard of this initiative? So I think in Michigan, that's probably pretty pretty interesting to pursue that one. But that was pretty fun to see kind of what the impressions were kind of in the US in terms of that marketing exposure. But clearly we try to be sometimes unique with a different angle in terms of getting ourselves a bit into the outside world. But that generates a lot of kind of impressions, basically. And I also want to talk through some of those initiatives, but clearly there's a lot of data points being generated through all those kind of marketing activation pieces as well, which is very interesting in how we onboard that back into our organization and we leverage that, activate on that. And the word activation, you will hear a lot from me today, because we are very focused on, like the keynote speaker was saying, it's not just having it in a data warehouse, what you do with it. Another maybe unique kind of positioning that we're in is kind of, and this is kind of a US metric. I think right now 65% of our sales is through digital channels, which is very dominant. We're probably pushing consistently more towards the 70% basically. And international, we're probably pursuing that goal as well. But you can see that that generates kind of a lot of transactions. And as far as I remember, I think, don't quote me on that, but my guess was that we are one of the largest e-com transaction providers in the US. We're behind Amazon and eBay, but we're pretty high in the top 10 in terms of kind of transactions, which is pretty interesting. And also something that has been proven very valuable is kind of what we initiated a couple of years ago, initially online first, is kind of our loyalty program. So clearly, I can imagine a lot of your organizations also potentially have a loyalty program if you have consumer facing. That allows us really to capture a lot of insights and behavioral patterns from our consumers basically. And how do we leverage that for kind of how we use that data to activate, to actually engage with them and be more relevant in terms of how we message with them in the right channel, right kind of like contextual setting. So we don't make those rookie mistakes in terms of, okay, if I provide you in real time an incentive basically or an upsell around salads, if your behavior in the last 7 ordering kind of sessions, you always declined, why are we pushing this again to you? So those are the kind of things that are creating a negative influence. So that's a bit the context around what kind of organization we are right now. We're very focused on technology and data. In our Ann Arbor headquarters, I think out of the 1,000 employees, I think we have 700 people working on data, technology, and analytics. So it's a powerhouse in terms of how much our CEO and leadership is valuing the power of information, data, analytics to fuel any kind of innovation, but also scaling it in the enterprise. So I'll talk a bit about my experience the last couple of years in terms of journey. When I came into the organization, what was the current state? How do we evolve consistently our capabilities and expand our capabilities across the organization? And what were some of our challenges, basically, but also opportunities that my team and the wider team tackled in terms of making sure we stay as much ahead of the curve as possible. And we don't have everything right. There's still a lot of failure and learnings that we have, but it's okay for us.
Are you going to talk about supply chain?
Yes.
That's probably freshness and
Yes.
consistency.
Correct. So, and I'll talk to you about kind of when I came into the organization, kind of the data domains and business functions that we traditionally were serving were all about kind of store level, point of sale, sales, a bit of marketing, a bit of the franchise perspective. So as part of the journey, and it was very deliberate, was really understanding first data strategy. What do we want to accomplish across the enterprise in consistent capabilities in terms of making sure that we can drive insight analytics, but then also what do we do with that insight to change potential business operations in terms of cutting away kind of inefficiencies, or really where we are very focused on as well from a consumer perspective, monetization basically. So I'll talk about all those domains, but please feel free if to ask questions after those kind of examples. So, so my group in the organization is called Enterprise Information Management, and BI is sitting under that. The whole construct changed a lot last couple of years in terms of how do we position ourselves in the organization. And we found a very sweet spot in terms of we are the glue across the enterprise, basically, because of our data tier foundation. So it's really about kind of how do we, and I put kind of a summary definition from Gartner on there, but what my group is very focused on is not just the government aspect, okay, the kind of data readiness, but also kind of how do we actually enable business insight, but not just the insight, but we're also what traditional BI, how it was defined in kind of Domino's a couple of years ago. We stopped probably at what kind of we heard this morning as well about, okay, we produce a deliverable and that's it. Now we're taking it a whole stretch further in terms of you create insights and not everything is a dashboard, and then actually then activate in terms of how do we leverage this kind of engine of data that we have to actually fuel kind of impact and change. And I'll give you a couple of examples across domains. So kind of our Domino's context is kind of really wrapped, pretty unique as well in terms of we are very, very integrated and there's no separation between business functions and, for example, some of the IT components. So it's one blended team that we work around projects and initiatives, basically, SWAT teams, tiger team kind of concepts, in order to make sure that our speed and value to market is as fast as possible, basically. So my team probably, and me, probably I work 95% with kind of the business executives across the enterprise, basically, to really identify strategic workflows, what are kind of the board level objectives that we need to pursue, leveraging data, and then construct kind of workflows around that. And one of the things that we were very focused on is there were, especially in business units that were pretty data immature, a lot of people are immediately kind of attached to the kind of the hype cycle or kind of the gadget or the flashy thing. We really wanted to stop that as well and making sure that if you can see a line of sight of capabilities that we can activate based upon what we've done here on the sales and marketing side, here's kind of the steps that we need to do, and it's a staircase approach in order to have that consistent capability across every domain function. So we really talked about data strategy first and identify in units like supply chain where, for example, we had a very fragmented data ecosystem. Okay, how do we get it into kind of a very flexible single source of truth and kind of like concept that we can then activate on those assets? So that was almost like my year one to say, okay, let's tackle all the kind of strategic assets that we don't have, that people were spending time on wrangling data, kind of 15 human touch points, no automation, basically no integration. We couldn't blend basically data domains. You couldn't do cross-functional analytics at the data tier level. So we really wanted to force that first. But then also kind of instill a culture of being agile and very fluid, and the nature of our business, because it's kind of the 30-minute kind of pizza category, we have to move fast and we have to have a culture where we can adapt very quickly, and we do a lot of transformations within kind of a year itself. And kind of like we're very clear in terms of objectives, in terms of what are the transformation that we need to do every year in order to stay ahead in terms of capabilities, what's out there in the market, or what we're missing, if that makes sense. So that's a bit of kind of our cultural context, what is really driven down by our CEO and kind of the whole C-suite towards our organization. So you saw that I kind of started the whole concept in terms of what is Domino's at this point, basically. There's a lot of data. There's just an explosive growth of the company, but it's kind of across every dimension in terms of supply chain, ordering, e-com, innovation work streams in terms of IoT that we deploy into our franchisee network. So that creates a lot more data. And just to give you some context, even the legacy, I think, batch kind of data sets. So we have a global POS, point of sales information, which is unified, uniform, which is very rare, to be honest, in some of the other QSR categories. So it's really a competitive advantage for us. So we still get like around 80 data extracts every day, every store, calculate them off in terms of 12,000, 14,000 stores. So that's high velocity. But also kind of as we grow in terms of transactions, and we just are kind of, our online ordering platform is just not just US. We also have a global platform, a global online ordering platform that we actually kind of deploy for some of our other entities abroad. Creates a lot of transactions, a lot of kind of real-time data points that we collect, fueling a lot of the other possibilities that we talked about. But also kind of IoT. I think 2018 was really the year where we productionized a lot of kind of event-based IoT events that are being generated by devices that we deployed in the store, or telemetry data, or some of the aspects of supply chain, basically, in terms of, okay, first of all, get it into kind of our ecosystem, but also have an ability to fold that very efficiently in terms of what is noise versus mine it more upstream, basically, understand what needs to be structured versus not. So we really are kind of, it's pretty cool to see in terms of how we activate on that in terms of understanding if we deploy an asset in a store, whether it's a kiosk, how can we better understand upsell, cross-sell opportunities, leverage that information basically. So that's pretty interesting. So a lot more real-time, near real-time. Clearly, we also offer back a lot of near real-time kind of insight to our franchisees. So we have kind of analytics platforms, not just for kind of in-house for DPZ as an enterprise, but we expose it out as well to kind of some of our stores to really make sure that they can have intraday decision making in terms of, okay, if this is the ordering flow coming into, do I have the right labor in the store basically to kind of like cater for that? Do I have enough drivers to cater for those orders? So a lot of that we've put in place in terms of making sure that we can respond very effectively. So what is our framework? I think our framework and how we approached a lot of it, and kind of like this is not set in stone. There's a lot of kind of transformation that we do every year, but clearly this is the key piece, data readiness. We wanted to make sure we have a very flexible framework to say, look at it as a menu offering in terms of pizza menu offering. We want to make sure that whoever in the organization has a need for data, we can spin up the right data basically in a matter of hours to activate kind of platforms, or in terms of marketing activation, in terms of e-com or campaign management. So that's kind of like what I talked about earlier in the morning in terms of making sure we have a very flexible framework and single source of truth. So that was really our data strategy in terms of making sure that we don't missing components of strategic assets in the enterprise that we still have to find. But we have a dedicated team making sure this flow is very dynamic in terms of what we integrate into our ecosystem. And then actually expose out in the organization in terms of fueling analytical insights. A use case I will talk a bit about today is our construct, which we call the unified customer view, basically. And that's really where we get a lot of traction in terms of activation. But also it fuels kind of not just kind of our BI stack or operational BI stack or kind of our franchisee analytics in terms of kind of leveraging that data for activation. But some of our engines are also fueling in real time basically what we can, how we engage with our customers basically. So here's kind of like understand around our customers 360-degree view in terms of purchase behavior, loyalty, when do they order basically, are they part from a household group basically, what is the purchasing power, are they part of an occasion group basically, are they changing occasion groups basically, and kind of like how do we engage with them in a more relevant way, and we can then integrate with our e-com organization across different channels and using that as reference data basically to then kind of optimize our kind of engagement with our customers as they shop, as they go on our platforms, which is very powerful. But we also provide a whole loop back in terms of feedback cycle, in terms of if there's a negative customer experience, how do you take that board in terms of feeding that back into our model just to make sure that we can then provide, for example, incentives to make it up or engage with that person just to make sure that we don't lose kind of our engagement with that individual. So that's kind of our high-level framework. I'm not going to talk too much about tech, but clearly there's a lot of kind of components to make this work for us in terms of our ability to leverage data. And this is kind of the domains and the kind of the business units that kind of like we are very focused on. So clearly sales, marketing, franchisee services, finance, HR, IT, supply chain, all of that is part of kind of that ecosystem. Supply chain has been very interesting because of, I think we have around 17 or 18 supply chain centers in North America, very fragmented in terms of data infrastructure basically. So we had to tackle that to make sure that one of the things we couldn't do up until a year and a half ago is really understanding, for example, focus on OTIF, for example. It's kind of a measurement construct around on time in full, which basically if a store orders or automated ordering basically based upon the forecast, how do we deliver from a supply chain center and logistics organization back to the store? In full, on time, accurate basically. So you're blending multiple domains and you need to really understand kind of and have an ability in real time pretty much to kind of expose those measurements out as well, which has created a lot of additional benefit in terms of making sure our customers, which are stores, we are kind of on the ball in terms of kind of our SLAs and kind of how do we engage with our customers from a store perspective. So very powerful once we kind of start leveraging that single source of truth. But it took a bit of time, I think, in terms of getting there, because I think every organization sometimes has kind of components where you really have to build it from the ground up in terms of automation. And I believe automation at scale, at kind of the data level to then, because that's prerequisite to really drive some of the next gen things that we're working on right now, what you heard this morning in terms of whether it's RPA, machine learning. And we're doing AI and all those kind of things, but it's in pockets as well. It's not at scale. And some of the things that we're doing, we really want to do it at scale for maximum business impact. So that's kind of our I would say, our staircase that I always try to mimic, basically, where we were, what are we trying to do. And it's really not about this kind of like, that's kind of a word that we don't want to use kind of in our organization anymore. Not everything is a dashboard, or the result is a dashboard that you heard this morning. I think not really understanding what are your measurements, why are you trying to measure it, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, is it an analysis first, or kind of, and that's why we really wanted to make sure that a lot of the things that we're doing in terms of strategy work is really at the C-suite level or VP level, to make sure that we truly understand what is noise versus what are really the things that we need to flush out, so we don't get distracted about trying to spin up 27,000 objects and there's no clue what those things are being used for. So I've seen it before, and that's something that we didn't want to do. That's a lot of education and talking to the right levels in the organization, just to make sure that kind of we don't get distracted. But it's also very focused on traditional BI as well, which we evolved from. So I think right now what we've done in the past is really making sure we have kind of, and it's a bit of the Gartner construct, but I think we all get the construct. We wanted to make sure we have all relevant data domains so we can fully diagnose basically if there's any challenges or system-wide issues that we need to get around in terms of business problems. So if our CEO says, okay, I have my global system view across sales, finance, people aspect, basically, franchisee perspective, we have a complete ability to drill down, understand at the lowest level to store level what's happening across every domain pretty much. So we can go vertical, horizontal, not just data tier, also in terms of some of our products that we engineered for kind of a very easy consumption in different parts of the organization. And much more decentralized. We don't have central BI. It's all decentralized. I assume in most of your organization you have the same experience, that it's self-serve, that's all happened already. That's kind of, for us, it's really the next level that we're trying to focus on there, where we're starting to get traction in terms of how do you do augmented analytics at scale at an enterprise level, automation. And it's also more, I'm very focused on in terms of, we do personalization and hyper-personalization at scale very well with our consumers, basically. I want to do the same in the organization. So really making sure that the right person in the organization has the right focus areas kind of pushed to them in a way that they consume, basically, that is relevant to them, without kind of have to mine products, data. So those are kind of our strategy that we really want to make sure that we kind of focus on as well. And monetization is very important to us. So I'll talk a bit about that in a bit. And monetization can be very different in organizations in terms of, from our perspective, in terms of consumers. It's all about kind of how are we kind of more relevant and the best way to engage with them, but also kind of understand some of the things that can actually drive revenue through A/B testing. So we're very focused on that. Or if you look at supply chain, how do we cut kind of inefficiencies out there in terms of we're losing money in terms of providing credits where we shouldn't be providing credits because our whole infrastructure in terms of delivering food to stores was not optimized. So those are the kind of things we go through there as well in terms of not just top line, but also kind of efficiencies and reducing waste out of our kind of operations. So that's kind of like where we are very focused on at this point. And clearly there's a lot of hype around AI, and we do a lot of kind of innovation work streams about AI as well in terms of kind of, okay, picture recognition, pizza, good quality, not good quality, all those kind of things. My group is kind of very focused on, I would say, kind of the automation at scale, and kind of once we figure out certain things, and then making sure that we can actually push it into the enterprise. But clearly there's a lot of things going on with machine learning, RPM, software RPM, and AI at this point. So this is kind of our construct in terms of what I called UC, Unified Customer View, basically. That is one of the things that we were, it's almost like a multi-year project that I think before I came into the organization started being defined as how do we know and have an understanding about our customers, basically. Very holistically, basically, based upon all the sources and touch points that they come into the organization, whether it's a call center, offline, online, basically, enriched with kind of external kind of data sets, basically, purchase behavior. And we started carving out kind of an engine, basically, to understand at an individual level, what do I know about my consumer, basically, so we can better kind of position ourselves and when we engage with a consumer. So that was quite interesting in terms of learning curve. But we also kind of wanted to understand in a broader contextual perspective in terms of if I'm an individual, you're probably part of a household. So we want to understand how is your household behaving, basically, in terms of engaging with us in a brand in different touch points, different kind of occasions, and how is that enriching our capabilities to leverage that data and information to better serve you as a customer. But we saw restrictions as well. So how do you deal with, for example, across our iterations with apartment buildings, for example? So the kind of like distortions there, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with kind of distortion of business versus residential? How do we deal kind of like, as consumers move across the US, basically, how do we deal with that perspective, basically, as they flow through stores and kind of different parts of the country? So we also wanted to construct a concept like occasion group. So an individual can be part of different occasion groups. So it could be part of a household, could be part of, hey, Friday night, I'm meeting with my buddies to play poker, and kind of it's always the same ordering pattern, basically. It could be different households, be it a rotation. So we can figure that out and understand, okay, what would be the right kind of timing for us to provide an incentive to engage with you, which you respond to. So very interesting in terms of dynamics. So this engine is being right now we're in a position to kind of recalibrate our kind of everything within 24 hours, basically, and it's kind of real-time activation in terms of our e-com layer. So very powerful in terms of how we tested out A/B and kind of the incremental lift and how we can monetize some of our data and put it into work. And it really has been very, very powerful for us. Clear attribution, clear return on investment, basically, which has been kind of the challenge now is kind of you're creating all those data points and feedback back as well, because you use that information for campaign management through kind of Adobe platform, for example, or through our loyalty kind of vehicle as well. And you have all those interesting data points coming back into the experiences. So you're building out new attributes about your consumers, basically, who has good experience, bad experience. So we all kind of like, this is getting, it's a gold mine. So that's kind of like how we're very focused around the consumer domain in terms of activation. But you can see this broader into the organization as well across other domains where we try to do similar things to really make sure that we can drive impact. That makes sense. So yeah, I talked a bit about that. So here's kind of like where that kind of concept comes into place by building out this kind of like engine at scale, basically, and it's being fueled and pushed into everything that you see in here in terms of digital kind of, you have campaign management, we leverage it very aggressively in kind of a social media analytics context as well, print marketing, loyalty, marketing science. So right now, all of it that comes back in terms of understanding recency, frequency, acquisition, retention about our consumers, segment everything, however we want to kind of like start targeting again. It's becoming pretty important part of our foundational tier in terms of how we kind of leverage that consumer domain. And that's what we're kind of focused on. I think we're very focused on driving, I think the data strategy is really kind of a strategic kind of a very important kind of mindset of the whole organization. It's proven out to be very kind of beneficial for us in terms of kind of the return that we see in terms of investing in that capability. But clearly some challenges. I think the automation at scale is going to be probably one of the biggest ones that we need to overcome, because we all know, I think, probably across your organizations as well, war of talent. How do we get the right people in our organization as well? And a lot of kind of the, even in kind of, if you talk about analytics, data science, a lot of that is going to be, how do you convert that to kind of an automation at scale, infuse and kind of through platforms, and then very, very iteratively kind of improve that capability maturity again. So those are kind of our challenges that we see right now or where we're working against. And that's a bit at this point our journey so far at Domino. So in 2 years and a half, I think lots of change. Traditional BI kind of like far away, but a lot more consumer facing in terms of our functions, and not just kind of like here's a static output and kind of like, but what do we do with this data and make it in kind of plug it into the right programs and parts of our organization where we know it will have a good impact. So that's a bit kind of my summarized storyline. I wanted to make sure we have a bit of question and answering time as well, because I know there probably will be some interest.
Yeah, so when you look at the Domino stock, the last 5 years has been like actually insanely successful. Do you guys, how much do you attribute, the analytics program to that? And then the second part of the question is, as you're developing all the different objects and projects, do you have a mechanism for measuring the value of them to help kind of shape your roadmap?
I'm going to stand over here. It's been very interesting because honestly, because of some of the, so question number one, especially around the consumer domain, basically, we do a lot of A/B testing. Every 1-2 weeks, there's a lot of A/B testing going on. And that really allows us, especially because it's tapping into that golden source, basically, to have clear attribution on return on investment. So there's specific revenue goals that we actually have, and that makes sure that we can reinvest some of that back into what are the capabilities that we need to focus on because we want to accelerate that, and that's return on investment. And also just to give you an idea, my group is not an L. We have a P&L. We are not a cost center, basically. So which is pretty unique as well. And our challenge more is about the demand for services outstrip what we could do, basically. So how do we prioritize effectively? I think there are innovation streams in our organization where we know we have to kind of invest into programs that are going to generate data. It's going to be very iteratively. Data maturity is, we don't know yet. Is it going to be a return? So we probably, if you have 20 innovation work streams, and they go through the funnel, basically, there's stage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 is kind of, is this an idea? 2 is this, can we pilot this, whether it's in a store? Could we pilot this in 5 to 100 stores? And then it gets into kind of like, is there a business case and an impact that we see with kind of like how consumers respond to it in terms of uplift or whatever it is, and then go through kind of a formal sign-off to say, okay, let's go national or go global across our stack. So there's a lot of constant kind of strategic reviews in terms of what should be worked on. We don't have it 100% fine-tuned because we work for everyone. The challenge we have is basically we support every EVP across the board. And how do you prioritize amongst EVPs? So almost like that's kind of our challenge as well, where sometimes we have to get like board level, kind of the yearly budget kind of direction from the CEO just to make sure that we minimize, yes, there's innovation, but we don't want to do tinkering. And we also want to make sure the strategic objectives are being done and what are those kind of objectives and how do we prioritize. If that makes sense.
Fred, if I could ask you 2 questions. One, I'm from Quicken Loans. We struggle with one of the issues that I think you would struggle with. Humans move, they change their names, their phone numbers, email addresses, in your case, food preferences, things like that. I noticed the icon for your data enrichment layer. I'd be curious to know if that is a driving factor in helping you to deal with that issue.
Yes, for sure. So we have kind of a very comprehensive MDM kind of concept engine, basically, which we enrich a lot of kind of data, external data, basically, not just socio-demographics, it's also validating basically some of the information about our consumers. But the good thing about us, our consumers are very frequent in terms of kind of purchases, yeah? And even across channels, we get different data points that we then kind of unify and benchmark. And we're pretty good in terms of understanding, are they really kind of, what has changed in their profile, or are they moved, and those kind of things. We've gotten pretty good at that, to be honest, in terms of making sure that it is truly the golden record, and it's as accurate as possible. Because even we've seen in the reverse, basically, where we started kind of like address information, if you like, kind of focus on that, where we started to enrich some of that, And we had to pull that back because we could see that our address information across our touch points and how we collect that, whether it's through loyalty or delivery, you need to know where you live. It's even that probably more of a good source for us to work with in certain instances. So yeah, we managed that pretty okay.
We would love if our consumers would take a mortgage every week. That'd be great. But so I noticed that your EIM, the governance process, if that was actually a process flow, that seemed to be at the start of all things. If that's the case, does that create a constraint to speed of delivery for you?
One of the things that I wanted to do as well with my team members is the interesting thing is because kind of the new kind of BI, the old BI team is almost like consultants, basically. We're a service organization. So basically they are kind of like consultants. They're focused on sometimes specialist areas. So we have somebody who's focused on supply chain, understands everything about the data, but also engages with, for example, is involved as part of the SWAT teams with kind of the strategic initiatives or the business problems that they need to kind of like need to resolve through data points. I think that works well, but that's important to kind of like making sure that you don't put all your knowledge into one individual. Yeah, that's one challenge that we have sometimes. But because of kind of our automation at the data tier level, that is kind of like, there's not that much human touch points, to be honest. Honestly, to keep that dynamic. So I have a data engineering team, basically. The upside of the whole equation is pretty minimal, to be honest. My data engineers are very much working on what are kind of the strategic assets that we don't have, how do we get it into our ecosystem, or through kind of as we deploy more kind of devices out there. So it's more, that evolved as well, data integration to more engineering side. But yeah, I think the unique talent that we are looking for are people who understand data, basically, have kind of consultative skills, because that's otherwise where it breaks down in our organization, because 95% of our time is working with the business stakeholders. And you see, that's a unique blend, to be honest, and a bit of kind of data scientist skills. That's kind of like, but it's very rare. It's very rare. We have 1 minute remaining. One more question.
Chris Miller, I work with Priority Health on the west side of the state. We work in the insurance industry, but one of the things you've mentioned, the single source of truth, you've mentioned the golden record. Could you speak to a little bit about some of the methodologies or technologies that are used in that space? I mean, I work as a data engineer working in a business unit. I'm actually working outside the organization. I hope no other IS people are here from Priority Health, because typically they're on the other side of the wall. And there's all these, it's the waterfall, even though they call it agile, it turns into a waterfall approach. And things are delivered to the business, but they don't live within the business and help push that. But I'm interested in trying to find, what's the answer to building that single source of truth? What is the ability to build the golden record? I mean, we get, data from, we've got 15,000 providers throwing us data. We've got government ingesting of data coming in every day, month, week. We've got web data that we get from our interfaces, from all of our, very mixed environment that I think you've dealt with in the past. And I just was curious as to your journey on this, development of this single source of truth and how you've made that real, and how data governance has enabled that rather than being the bureaucracy that prevents that winds up putting the brakes on all that and making it less than successful.
Good question. So we try to get 0 minutes remaining. Can I just answer this question? So yeah, we try to find also the right partners to help us accelerate that. So external partners in terms of, in this case, we needed to have a very good and kind of flexible MDM platform. So we work with a company called Maestro. Prophecy has a product called Maestro. We are looking for companies who also want to provide thought leadership and work with us through iterations, basically. So that's one part of the equation. We're very selective in terms of kind of who we work with from a vendor perspective. But on the other side, like I kind of shared a bit in the beginning, the SWAT team concept. So we create kind of constructing this engine creates a number of competencies that you need to bring into a room and across a project to make this happen. So in this case, for us, it was kind of, yet a vendor, more from a platform automation perspective, but we had kind of strategy and insight people, data scientists basically, then data engineers basically, And kind of like, that's the kind of skill sets that we brought together basically in order to make this happen, honestly. And iteratively, we had iterations like multiple times a year. We had we're now version 3.1 basically, but we also kind of tested out basically then in terms of understanding that this is not a 6-month project normally to test something out. We're truly agile basically. But we also want to have a test bed where we can understand, is this accurately enough if we compare it to kind of, for example, traditional kind of where we used to generate kind of list for customers based upon maybe our e-com part or what kind of like through our point of sales, and compare it with this new source basically, create a control group and test it out in our Team USA or our corporate-owned stores to their consumers, see what is the uplift, iterate if it's not there. So it's very much at the frontier in terms of activation. I hope it was somewhat interesting, the journey. I think we're out in terms of time. But please feel free to reach out to me if you want to have a conversation. I'll be around for the next 3-4 hours at least. But thanks for listening in.